Baltimore Ridge, Massachusetts. It was one of those crisp January afternoons where the light fades faster than you expect, the kind of day that forces you to pull your jacket tighter against the cold without even thinking about it. At Westfield Central High School, the final bell had rung, and the low, steady hum of end-of-day chatter spilled into the hallways. Backpacks zipped, lockers slammed, and the rhythm of another winter school day wound down into the familiar migration toward buses, cars, and sidewalks. Emily Carter was among the crowd, moving with the purpose of someone who always had somewhere to be. She wasn't the kind of senior who lingered aimlessly in the halls. Friends knew her routine: school, a quick drive to pick up her younger brother from the community center, and then home for dinner with her mom. She was 18, sharp-minded, a varsity athlete, and meticulous about her time. You could set your watch to her habits. That was why, when she didn't show up where she was supposed to be, it didn't take long for people to notice. Emily's day had started as predictably as any other. She'd sat through her morning classes, knocked out a quiz in AP Literature, and stopped by the guidance office to confirm her college application packet was on schedule. A friend later recalled Emily mentioning she had to run an errand before picking up her brother. She didn't say what it was or who it involved, but it wasn't unusual for her to handle small tasks on her own. She was independent that way. Just after 2:30 p.m., she was seen heading toward the student parking lot, a black backpack slung over one shoulder, car keys in hand. The car, a silver 1993 Honda Accord, was something of a hand-me-down, a little faded from years of New England winters but dependable. It was parked in the second row from the main entrance, exactly where she always left it. No one saw her get in. No one saw her pull out. At least, not in a way that could later be confirmed. That's the thing about high school parking lots. For the students inside them, they're just the staging ground for the next thing: practice, work, home. But for investigators, those spaces are like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. Dozens of cars moving at once, students waving to friends, people coming and going, and no comprehensive surveillance to catch the details. In 1999, Westfield Central didn't have a campus-wide camera system. What police would have to work with later came down to witness memory, and memory is fragile. That afternoon, the sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the lot. Temperatures hovered in the mid-30s, enough for a thin frost to cling to the grass along the edges of the asphalt. Students streamed out, most with their minds already on whatever came next. Emily should have been one of them, heading toward the south side of town, toward the community center where her little brother would be waiting. But she never arrived. By 4:15 p.m., her mother, Martha Carter, was worried. Emily wasn't the kind to disappear without a call. Martha tried her daughter's cell phone, no answer. She called the community center. Emily hadn't been there. She called two of Emily's closest friends. Neither had seen her since school. By 6 p.m., the worry had hardened into something closer to fear. Martha drove the route Emily usually took, scanning intersections, parking lots, even side streets just in case the car had broken down. Nothing. At 7:12 p.m., she dialed 911. In cases like this, the first few hours matter more than most people realize. Missing person reports for teenagers are tricky, especially in the late 1990s. Back then, if a high school senior went missing, some departments leaned toward the possibility of a runaway unless there were signs of foul play. But Emily's profile didn't fit that narrative. She was dependable. She had obligations she took seriously. And she had vanished without telling a single person where she was going. The initial patrol officers took the report at the Carter home. They noted the absence of any prior incidents. No history of Emily staying out without notice, no conflicts at home, no signs of depression. Her room was undisturbed. The phone in her bedroom sat neatly on its cradle. A calendar on the desk was marked with upcoming exams and lacrosse practice. There was no note. By 9 p.m., police had entered Emily into the National Crime Information Center as a missing person. Officers did a light canvass of the streets around Westfield Central, but in the dark, with the trail already hours old, there was little to see. The next morning, detectives began locking down what they call a last known routine. They spoke with teachers, coaches, and classmates. They pulled attendance records, confirming Emily had been in every class that day. They inventoried her locker. Nothing unusual inside. The parking lot was checked for tire marks or discarded items, but any trace evidence had likely been disturbed by hundreds of cars leaving the day before. By mid-afternoon, the case had already escalated internally. Emily had missed all three of what investigators call obligation pressure points. The pickup of her brother, the expected evening call to her mom, and returning home. For someone like her, missing even one of those would have been unusual. Missing all three without explanation? That was a red flag. Detectives requested her cell phone records from the carrier. In 1999, that was a slow process. Records came back on paper, not in real time. They also asked the family for recent bills to identify frequent contacts. They checked her bank account, no withdrawals, no card use. It was as if she'd simply stopped moving. Flyers were printed and distributed. Local news stations ran short segments, missing senior from Baltimore Ridge, showing her yearbook photo alongside a shot of her silver Accord. The community response was quick. Neighbors volunteered to search wooded trails, side streets, and parking lots. Still, there was nothing. No confirmed sightings. No vehicle. No transactions. Looking back now, the first 48 hours tell you a lot about how the rest of this case would unfold. There was no smoking gun in those early hours, no piece of physical evidence that screamed abduction or foul play. But for investigators, the absence of normal activity was evidence in itself. Reliable people don't just go silent. What happened between the moment Emily walked toward her car and the moment she disappeared from every known pattern of her life would become the central question for years to come. And as the days stretched into weeks, the answer would take the case far beyond a missing persons file. Almost 4 weeks later, in a wooded park on the edge of town, that answer would start to take shape, buried just beneath the frozen ground. If you're listening to this story, keep that first afternoon in mind. Because the more you understand Emily's predictability, the clearer it becomes how abnormal that day truly was. Every case starts with a timeline. In this one, the first line was drawn at 2:30 p.m., January 14, 1999, when Emily Carter walked out of school and vanished into the cold winter air. And for the people who loved her, life would never be predictable again. Before a case becomes a headline, it starts as a person. And before Emily Carter became the missing senior from Baltimore Ridge, she was simply Emily, daughter, sister, teammate, friend. She grew up in a modest 2-story home on Brookside Avenue, a quiet street lined with sugar maples that flamed orange and red in the fall and stood bare in the deep New England winter. Her mother, Martha Carter, worked as an administrative assistant for a dental practice downtown. Her father had left the family when Emily was 8, and from then on, it was just Martha, Emily, and her younger brother, Dylan. Money was never plentiful, but Martha kept the household steady. She raised her kids on a diet of small-town values: show up on time, do the work, keep your word. And Emily, more than anyone, seemed to have absorbed those lessons completely. At Westfield Central High School, Emily stood out not because she chased attention, but because she didn't need to. She was naturally competent. A starting midfielder on the girls' lacrosse team, she could sprint the length of the field and still finish her calculus homework before practice ended. Her GPA hovered near the top of the class, and she'd already been accepted to Northeastern University for the fall. Her teachers described her as driven but grounded. She'd volunteer to tutor freshmen in biology one day, then spend the next coaching her brother's youth soccer team. The guidance counselor had noted on her file, highly responsible, relied upon by peers and staff. That reliability was woven into her daily routine. On school days, she left home by 7:20 a.m., the Honda Accord's tires crunching over frost as she backed out of the driveway. After classes, she drove straight to the community center to pick up Dylan at 3:30 p.m., then both would head home for dinner. It wasn't just a schedule, it was a promise. January 14, 1999, had started exactly that way. At breakfast, Martha remembered, Emily had been flipping through a stack of college orientation brochures while buttering toast. Dylan had been asking if they could stop for hot chocolate on the way home from the community center. It was a Thursday, lacrosse practice had been canceled because of icy field conditions. Before she left for school, Emily had mentioned she might swing by somewhere after class but didn't say where. Martha didn't think much of it at the time. Emily often ran small errands, picking up paper for a project or stopping by the pharmacy for her mom. At school, classmates remembered her mood as normal. In AP Literature, she laughed at a joke about their upcoming essay. In the lunchroom, she shared fries with her friend, Sarah Nolan. In chemistry, she was focused, taking meticulous notes. There was nothing to suggest she was distracted or upset. The last confirmed memory anyone had of her inside the school was in the final period, English composition. The bell rang at 2:25 p.m., and Emily headed toward her locker. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, exchanged a quick goodbye to a teammate, and walked toward the main exit. That was it. From the moment she stepped outside, the record blurs. Some students said they saw her moving toward the second row of the student parking lot where she always parked. One claimed she might have been talking to someone near her car, but couldn't recall the person's face. Another thought she was alone. No one saw her pull out. The Honda Accord was more than just transportation. It was a kind of independence Emily had earned. A faded silver sedan, it had a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot mishap the year before. The passenger seat was perpetually cluttered with textbooks, a folded windbreaker, and a pair of lacrosse cleats in a mesh bag. That car was the unspoken link between home, school, and her responsibilities. When it vanished along with her, it became a key focus of the investigation. Then there was Dylan. At 3:35 p.m., when she didn't arrive at the community center, he assumed she was running late. By 3:45, he tried calling her cell phone. No answer. By 4 o'clock, the center's receptionist phoned Martha, who left work immediately and drove the route Emily usually took. Martha's first stop was the school parking lot. Empty by then except for a few stray cars and drifting clumps of slush pushed aside by the plows. No Honda Accord. She drove to the gas station Emily sometimes used, then to the pharmacy, then to the grocery store. Nothing. If you've lived in a small town, you know how quickly word travels. By the time Martha got home at 5 p.m., she'd already fielded calls from 2 neighbors asking if everything was okay. They'd seen her driving around looking worried. By 6 o'clock, worry had hardened into fear. When the first officers arrived at the Carter home to take the missing persons report, they were struck by the contrast between the tidy living room and the growing sense of panic inside it. On the coffee table sat Emily's favorite mug, half full from the morning. On the couch, Dylan clutched a blanket and kept asking if they'd found her yet. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Detective Laura Mitchell, a veteran with over a decade in missing persons. She'd seen both sides of these cases, the runaways who returned within days and the ones that turned into something far darker. From the start, Mitchell noted Emily's high reliability baseline. In plain terms, that meant this wasn't a kid prone to disappearing. That fact alone pushed the case up the priority list. She began mapping Emily's life. Friends, teachers, extracurriculars, anyone who might have had contact with her in the days before she vanished. A list of recent phone contacts was compiled from the family's bills. Names were cross-referenced with student directories. By day's end, the official narrative was still painfully short. Emily Carter was last seen leaving Westfield Central High School at approximately 2:30 p.m. on January 14, 1999. She was expected to pick up her younger brother at 3:30 p.m. but never arrived. Her silver 1993 Honda Accord was missing. Her cell phone and bank accounts showed no activity after 2:30 p.m. For the Carters, those bullet points weren't just a summary, they were the start of a nightmare. The next steps would widen the search, canvassing the streets between the school and the community center, checking parking lots, reaching out to local businesses for any camera footage. But as part 3 of this story will show, in 1999, technology wasn't yet the ally it would become in later years. For now, all anyone had was a name, a face, and a routine that had been broken in a way no one could yet explain. January 14, 1999, started without warning of what was to come. Emily Carter's day on paper looked like hundreds before it, structured, predictable, mapped out almost to the minute. But in real investigations, it's often the days that look ordinary that hold the sharpest breaks. At Westfield Central High School, attendance records confirmed she'd been in every class. First period AP Literature, then Chemistry, then a short study hall before lunch. Her friends remembered her laughing at something in the cafeteria. Sarah Nolan said Emily was teasing another friend about their poor attempt at folding a paper fortune teller. Nothing about her demeanor suggested stress, fear, or plans to disappear. By 1:45 p.m., she was in English composition, her last class of the day. When the bell rang at 2:25, she packed her bag, waved briefly to a teammate, and walked toward the main entrance. The school's layout placed the front doors about 150 feet from the student parking lot. No cameras, no security guards stationed at the exit, just a flow of teenagers moving toward their rides. Witness accounts begin to fracture here. One student, a sophomore named Mark Davison, told police he saw Emily walking alone toward the second row of the lot where her silver Honda Accord was usually parked. He didn't see her speak to anyone and didn't see her drive away. Another, junior track athlete Lisa Chapman, thought she saw Emily near the driver's side of her car talking to someone. Lisa couldn't describe the person. She said the view was blocked by another vehicle pulling out, but she thought the figure was male. Neither account could be confirmed. And in missing person cases, conflicting witness statements aren't unusual. Memory tends to bend under the weight of hindsight. By 3:30 p.m., when Emily didn't show up to collect her brother Dylan, the timeline began to tighten. The community center receptionist waited a few minutes before calling the Carter home. Martha assumed there was a minor delay, traffic, a stop for gas. But when Dylan tried Emily's cell phone and got no answer, the first edge of unease set in. At 3:45 p.m., Martha left work. She drove straight to the school, hoping maybe Emily had stayed late to meet a teacher or friend. But the lot was nearly empty. No silver Honda. From there, Martha traced every logical stop Emily might have made. The gas station she favored on Maple Street, the pharmacy where she picked up prescriptions, the grocery store where she occasionally grabbed bread or milk before heading home. Nothing. By 4:45 p.m., Martha was circling roads she hadn't driven in years. Side streets, the back access road behind the strip mall, even the narrow service lane leading toward the old mill site. Still nothing. At 7:12 p.m., she dialed 911. The first patrol officers arrived at 7:28. They took the basic report, asked for a recent photograph, and radioed out a be on the lookout for the Honda Accord, Massachusetts plate 7XN218. They also entered Emily into the NCIC as a missing person. The officers' questions were methodical. Had Emily ever stayed out overnight without notice? Any recent arguments? Did she have a boyfriend? Was there any sign she'd taken extra clothes or money? The answers kept circling back to the same point. Emily didn't just leave. She was steady, predictable, and nothing about her room or belongings suggested she'd planned to be gone. Detective Laura Mitchell was assigned by 9 p.m. She knew the odds. Statistically, the sooner you find a missing young woman, the better the chances of bringing her home. But by nightfall, there was already a gap of several hours since Emily had last been seen. That gap would become the central problem in the days ahead. Mitchell's first move was to lock down the last known routine. She and her team interviewed teachers who had seen Emily that day. They inventoried her locker, books, a gym bag, nothing unusual. They checked attendance logs, guidance office records, and coaching rosters. The parking lot was canvassed, but in the darkness and after so much traffic, any potential trace evidence was likely gone. By the next morning, January 15th, the department had started what they called a soft perimeter search. Patrol units drove the main routes between the school and the community center, checked public parking lots, and spoke to employees at gas stations and convenience stores. Flyers were printed, Emily's school photo on the left, the silver Honda Accord on the right. Local news aired a brief segment. Baltimore Ridge police are seeking help locating 18-year-old Emily Carter, last seen leaving Westfield Central High School yesterday afternoon. The response from the community was immediate. Volunteers began walking wooded trails, scanning the edges of frozen ponds, and combing through alleys behind stores. But there were no confirmed sightings. On January 16th, detectives put in a formal request to Emily's cell phone provider for her call detail records. In 1999, this wasn't instant. The request would go through the carrier's legal department, and results might not arrive for several days. To speed things up, Mitchell asked Martha for the most recent paper bill from their home mail, which showed frequent numbers Emily called. Those contacts were cross-checked against the school directory. By January 17th, they had spoken to most of her close friends. None reported knowing where she might have been headed after school. None had seen her leave in another car. Still, there was one odd note. 2 classmates mentioned that Emily had said she needed to meet someone before picking up Dylan. Neither knew who it was. On January 18th, a lead came in through the tip line. A man driving near Franklin Avenue reported seeing a silver Honda Accord matching Emily's shortly after 3 p.m. on the day she vanished. He said it was heading west toward the edge of town, near the wooded expanse of Forest Hollow Park. Patrol units drove the route, checked roadside pull-offs and parking areas. Nothing. The park was large, hundreds of acres of dense woodland, winding trails and service roads, and without a specific location, a full search would require significant manpower. Mitchell made the call to hold off on committing large resources there until they had something more concrete like phone records or a direct witness placing Emily in the area. By the end of the first week, the facts were painfully simple. Emily Carter was last seen at approximately 2:30 p.m. January 14th, in the school parking lot. She missed all her routine obligations that day. Her car and personal effects were missing. No financial or phone activity occurred after her disappearance. For detectives, it was the kind of case that shifts from maybe she's with friends to something is wrong in just days. For her family, it was the start of a clock that wouldn't stop ticking until they had answers. And for the community, the absence of any trace at all was beginning to feel like the most troubling evidence of all. 4 weeks had passed since Emily Carter was last seen walking toward her car in the Westfield Central parking lot. In those weeks, the case had transformed from an urgent missing person search into a slow, grinding investigation that yielded little more than theories. Detective Laura Mitchell and her team had followed dozens of leads, tips from drivers, people who thought they saw her car, vague sightings in strip mall parking lots. Each lead faded on contact with reality. Then came the afternoon of February 10, 1999. At 1:37 p.m., a man named Harold Givens was walking his dog along the eastern trails of Forest Hollow Park. It wasn't his usual route. Heavy winds the day before had knocked branches onto the main path, so he'd taken the longer way around. Forest Hollow in winter was quiet. Bare trees, frozen earth, the occasional rustle of a squirrel. Harold noticed something odd just off the trail. About 20 feet into the underbrush, the ground looked disturbed, soil darker, looser than the frozen leaves surrounding it. At first he thought maybe it was where a tree had been uprooted, but the shape didn't match. It was a shallow rise about the length of a person. He stepped closer, his dog straining at the leash. The earth looked recently turned, and along the edge a corner of fabric poked through. Harold pulled back immediately. He didn't touch anything else. He backed away to the trail and dialed 911. Patrol officers arrived first, marking the area with tape and keeping back curious onlookers. Forest Hollow was large, but this section, off the Franklin Road Service entrance, was accessible by a narrow dirt path that could accommodate a small vehicle. When Detective Mitchell got the call, she was in her office, reviewing phone record subpoenas that had finally come in. She was on site within 25 minutes. The temperature was just above freezing, the air dry and still. The scene was secured, photographs taken from multiple angles before anyone disturbed the soil. A forensic services team began the slow process of excavation. The top layer peeled away, frozen leaf litter, then darker, looser soil. Within minutes, they uncovered more fabric. Beneath it, hair. The recovery was methodical. The body was partially wrapped in what looked like an old bedsheet. The sheet was damp, edges stiff from the cold. The victim's clothing, dark jeans, light-colored shirt, matched the description Martha Carter had given the night Emily disappeared. Identification was confirmed later through dental records, but those on scene already knew. It was Emily. Forensic techs documented the burial site in detail. Orientation of the body, lying on her right side, knees slightly drawn in. Depth. Roughly 16 inches from the surface to the highest point of the body. Wrapping, a single sheet, tied loosely at one end. Soil composition, dense clay mixed with leaf debris, likely undisturbed until recent weeks. No purse, no cell phone, no car keys were found. The sheet and clothing were collected for trace evidence. Fibers, hairs, soil particles. Technicians took soil samples from around and beneath the body, hoping to compare them to any soil found in a suspect's vehicle or on clothing. At the office of the chief medical examiner, the autopsy began the next morning. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Petechial hemorrhages in the eyes confirmed it, along with bruising on the neck and soft tissue damage beneath the skin. The medical examiner noted the absence of defensive wounds, no scratches on the hands, no skin under the fingernails. That suggested either the attack was a surprise, or Emily had been restrained. There were signs the body had been moved after death. Soil embedded in her clothing didn't match the burial site's upper layers, suggesting she'd been placed there some time after dying. Toxicology screens came back negative for drugs or alcohol. For Mitchell, the location of the body answered one question but raised several more. Forest Hollow Park wasn't random. Locals knew it as a place where, over the years, stolen cars had been dumped, drug deals had taken place, and in rare cases, bodies had been found. It was secluded enough to operate unseen, but close enough to town for quick access. The service road from Franklin Road to the burial site was narrow, but a small car could get through. Tire tracks were faint, winter frost had hardened the soil, but there were impressions just inside the treeline. The tread pattern was photographed and measured. Mitchell had the park plotted on a large map in the precinct's conference room. She marked the burial location in red, then overlaid it with known addresses from the investigation. Emily's home, the school, her friends' houses. The park sat less than 15 minutes from Westfield Central by car. The discovery changed the case instantly. It was no longer about finding Emily, it was about finding who had taken her life. The focus shifted to the window between 2:30 p.m., when she left school, and 4 p.m., when the medical examiner believed she'd been killed. That 90-minute window now included a destination, Forest Hollow Park. Mitchell revisited every witness from the original missing person investigation. The questions changed. Instead of where might she have gone, it was now, who had the opportunity to put her in that park? The community reaction was immediate and visceral. News crews parked outside the Carter home. Students at Westfield Central were called into assemblies where grief counselors spoke about loss, shock, and safety. Parents started driving their teens to and from school, no longer trusting the short walk through the lot. For Martha and Dylan, the confirmation was devastating. In the quiet of their living room, Martha clutched a framed photo of Emily and told Mitchell, "I knew she wasn't coming home. I just didn't want to be right." From an investigative standpoint, Forest Hollow was the first, and so far only, crime scene. There was no evidence the killing happened there, but it was the place where the killer had left Emily. And in homicide work, that matters. Dump sites can tell you about access, about risk tolerance, even about the kind of vehicle a suspect might have used. The sheet she was wrapped in was sent to the state lab. Fibers caught in its weave would later be cataloged for DNA testing if technology allowed. The soil samples from the site were compared to dirt in the wheel wells of recovered vehicles tied to persons of interest. Everything was documented because in a case built without eyewitnesses, the physical record would be the backbone of any prosecution. By the end of February, the file on Emily Carter's death was thick with reports, maps, and lab requests, but still missing the one thing investigators needed most: a clear link between her final moments at Westfield Central and her final resting place in Forest Hollow Park. That link would come, in part, from an unlikely source: cell phone records from a time when such data was just beginning to shape criminal investigations. But with those records would come a new challenge: deciding which voices in the case were telling the truth, and which were shaping it to fit their own story. With the discovery of Emily Carter's body at Forest Hollow Park, the case shifted overnight. The investigation was no longer about hope, it was about proof. Detective Laura Mitchell now had two fixed points in her timeline. 2:30 p.m., January 14, 1999, Emily leaves Westfield Central High School. Likely before 4 p.m., she is killed and later buried at Forest Hollow. The question was, what happened in between? Re-examining the witnesses, Mitchell and her team returned to every student, teacher, and staff member who had been interviewed in the first days of Emily's disappearance. This time the questions were sharper. It wasn't enough to know if someone had seen her. They needed exact times, exact locations, exact actions. The statements were compiled into a master chart on the squad room wall. Mark Davison, sophomore, saw Emily walking alone toward the parking lot. Couldn't confirm if she reached her car. Lisa Chapman, Jr., thought she saw Emily talking to a male near the driver's side of her car. Couldn't identify him. Sarah Nolan, close friend, spoke with Emily at lunch, heard her say she had a quick meeting after school but didn't know with who. Each account was weighed against the others, looking for overlaps or contradictions. Cell phone records. On February 15th, the long-awaited call detail records from Emily's cell provider arrived. They came printed on several pages, lists of incoming and outgoing calls with times and the cell tower each connected to. One entry caught Mitchell's eye. At 2:37 p.m. on the day Emily vanished, her phone received a call from a number registered to Jason Miller, a 20-year-old former Westfield Central student. Jason had graduated the year before and was known to still keep in touch with a few students. The call lasted 42 seconds. The tower that handled it was located less than a mile from the high school. Two more calls from Jason's number appeared that afternoon. One at 3:02 p.m. connecting through a tower near the western edge of town, and another at 3:19 p.m. hitting the same tower sector that covered the access road to Forest Hollow Park. The phone activity stopped after that. Jason Miller. Jason wasn't a stranger to Emily. They dated briefly during her junior year. The breakup had been described as amicable by friends, though one recalled that Jason didn't take it well at first. He lived with his parents on the west side of Baltimore Ridge, worked part-time at an auto repair shop, and occasionally played in a local garage band. When detectives first interviewed him back in January, Jason said he hadn't seen Emily on the day she disappeared. He admitted they had spoken on the phone a few days earlier, but claimed it was casual. Now, with the phone records in hand, Mitchell knew he had spoken to her the very afternoon she vanished. The second interview. Jason was brought in for a second interview on February 17th. This time, Mitchell placed a copy of the call log on the table between them. "Help me understand why you said you hadn't spoken to Emily that day," she began. Jason hesitated, then said he had called her to ask about a mutual friend's birthday party. He claimed she mentioned she was in a hurry and couldn't talk long. When pressed about his location during the 3:19 p.m. call, Jason said he had been driving home. But the route he described didn't match the cell tower coverage. To hit that tower, he would have had to be within a mile or two of Forest Hollow's access road. He couldn't explain that discrepancy. Surveillance footage. Around the same time, detectives rechecked with businesses along possible routes Emily might have taken. Most January 14th tapes had been overwritten. This was still the VHS era, but one gas station on Western Avenue had a camera facing the intersection. The footage was grainy, timestamped 3:06 p.m. A silver sedan matching Emily's Honda Accord passed through the frame, followed by a dark blue pickup truck. Detectives couldn't confirm the driver of either vehicle, but the direction of travel was toward Forest Hollow. The Accord. On February 20th, Emily's Honda Accord was found abandoned behind an old warehouse 2 miles from the park. The doors were locked. The keys were missing. Inside, detectives found her backpack in the back seat, containing schoolbooks and a half-empty water bottle. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than Emily would have needed. She was 5 feet 6 inches, and the seat position suggested someone taller had driven last. Forensic techs collected soil from the wheel wells. Preliminary analysis suggested a match to the clay-rich soil taken from the burial site, narrowing the field. By the end of February, the investigation had narrowed to a handful of individuals with known contact with Emily in the days before her disappearance. Jason Miller was at the top of that list, not yet charged but under close watch. Mitchell's working theory was forming. Emily leaves school after a brief phone call with Jason, meets him somewhere between Westfield Central and the west side of town, and within an hour she is dead. But theory wasn't enough. She needed a chain of evidence that could survive in court. The community's role. Meanwhile, the community was restless. Flyers were updated from missing to homicide investigation. News crews lingered outside the police station. Students at Westfield Central whispered about Jason, though no charges had been filed. Martha Carter kept her public statements short. "We just want the truth," she told a local reporter. "We want whoever did this to my daughter to be held accountable." Next steps. Detectives began piecing together Jason's movements on January 14th through anyone who had seen him. A coworker at the auto shop said he'd left work around 2 p.m. that day. A neighbor remembered seeing his truck parked at home sometime after 4 p.m. The gap between those times was just enough to fit the timeline of Emily's death. Mitchell pushed for a search warrant on Jason's truck and bedroom. When it was approved, forensic teams went in. They collected fibers from the truck's floor mats, soil samples from the tires, and a bedsheet from his closet that looked similar to the one Emily had been wrapped in. The lab results would take weeks. But Mitchell knew, if those fibers or soil samples linked Jason directly to Forest Hollow, the case could move from suspicion to charge. The investigation was tightening like a noose. And soon, the evidence from those searches would tip the balance toward an arrest, setting the stage for one of the most contested trials Baltimore Ridge had ever seen. By the first week of March 1999, the investigation into Emily Carter's murder had reached a point where suspicion was narrowing into certainty, at least in the minds of Detective Laura Mitchell and the team at Baltimore Ridge Police. The search of Jason Miller's truck had produced several notable findings. Soil samples taken from the wheel wells contained the same distinctive clay composition found at Forest Hollow's burial site. Fibers collected from the truck's passenger seat matched the weave and color of the bedsheet Emily had been wrapped in. And a partial palm print on the inside of the passenger door matched Emily's. These weren't coincidences. To Mitchell, they were the connective tissue that linked Jason to the last known movement of Emily Carter. The arrest. On the morning of March 9th, officers executed an arrest warrant at Jason's parents' home. He was taken into custody without incident, wearing the same worn denim jacket he'd had during his second interview. His expression was flat. Some described it as defiant, others as numb. The charge, first-degree murder, with additional counts of unlawful restraint and evidence tampering. Jason's parents watched from the porch as their son was led away in handcuffs, his mother in tears, his father stone-faced. For the Carter family, the arrest was a turning point. Martha told reporters gathered outside her home, "We finally know who took Emily from us. Now we need to see justice done." Pre-trial build-up. The case quickly became the most talked-about criminal matter in Baltimore Ridge in over a decade. The local paper ran front-page stories almost daily. Television crews set up outside the courthouse weeks before the trial even began. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Claire Reynolds, prepared a case built primarily on circumstantial evidence. Cell phone records placing Jason near Forest Hollow at the time Emily disappeared. The 2:37 p.m. call between Jason and Emily. The soil and fiber matches from his truck. Testimony from classmates who saw Emily possibly talking to a male near her car. The palm print inside Jason's truck. Reynolds knew there was no eyewitness to the killing, no DNA directly linking Jason to the act of strangulation. but she believed the totality of the evidence would leave the jury with only one reasonable conclusion. Jason's defense attorney, Michael Harrington, took the opposite stance. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial at best, and pointed out that soil and fiber transfer could occur without murder being involved. The palm print, he said, was explainable. They had dated before and Emily had been in Jason's truck in the past. The defense's narrative was simple. Jason did see Emily that day, but she left alive. Whatever happened afterward, he claimed, had nothing to do with him. The trial begins. The trial opened on September 13, 1999, in the Baltimore Ridge County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Reporters in the back, sketch artists along one side, and a jury of 7 women and 5 men seated in the box. Martha Carter sat in the front row of the gallery, a framed photo of Emily in her hands. In her opening statement, Ada Reynolds painted Emily as a responsible young woman whose life was cut short in a narrow window of time, one in which Jason Miller was the only person known to have had both contact and opportunity. She promised the jury they would see a pattern in the evidence, one that pointed directly at the defendant. Harrington countered by warning the jury about the danger of filling in gaps with assumptions. He stressed that no one had seen Jason harm Emily and that the state was asking them to convict based on theory, not fact. The evidence. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution called more than 24 witnesses. Cell phone experts testified about tower coverage, explaining that Jason's phone connected to a tower sector covering the Forest Hollow area at 3:19 p.m. on January 14. A forensic soil analyst described the chemical signature of the clay found at the burial site and how it matched the soil on Jason's truck. A textile specialist explained the similarity between fibers from the sheet and those found in the vehicle. Sarah Nolan recounted Emily's mention of a quick meeting after school. Lisa Chapman told the jury she thought she saw Emily speaking with a male near her car, though she admitted she couldn't identify him. The defense's turn. When it was their turn, the defense called Jason himself to the stand. He testified that Emily had agreed to meet him to talk about clearing the air after their breakup. They sat in his truck for a few minutes, he said, then she left in her own car. He denied going to Forest Hollow that day, suggesting the cell tower ping could have been from anywhere on the west side of town. As for the soil and fibers, he claimed his truck was often used to transport various items for the auto shop, and anyone could have left those traces. Harrington also called a telecom consultant who challenged the precision of 1999 cell tower location data, warning that the coverage area was too broad to place Jason definitively at Forest Hollow. Closing arguments. Reynolds told the jury, when you line up the facts, her last phone call to him, his proximity to the burial site, the physical evidence in his truck, there is no reasonable doubt left. Emily Carter did not walk away from that meeting alive. Harrington urged them to focus on the absence of direct evidence. The state wants you to connect dots that aren't proven to connect. They want you to fill the spaces between with suspicion. That is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The verdict. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood, hands gripping the rail. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of unlawful restraint, guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. Jason Miller showed little visible reaction, staring down at the defense table. Martha Carter's shoulders shook as she held her son's photo closer. Sentencing. In October 1999, Jason Miller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge told him, "Your choices ended the life of a young woman who had everything ahead of her. You took her future and you took her family's peace. This court will take your freedom." For the community, the trial's end was both closure and a reminder that the answers had come at a cost. For the Carter family, it was a victory in court, but no victory could bring Emily back. When the gavel came down in October 1999, Jason Miller was sentenced to life without parole. For the Carter family, it was the end of a 9-month nightmare. For Baltimore Ridge, it was a conclusion, a line drawn under a case that had gripped the town for nearly a year. But in the American legal system, a conviction isn't always the final chapter. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a longer, quieter war fought in appellate courts, forensic labs, and the court of public opinion. The first appeal. Jason's defense attorney, Michael Harrington, filed a notice of appeal within weeks of sentencing. His arguments centered on 2 main points. The prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. The cell tower data used to place Jason near Forest Hollow was unreliable by modern standards even in 1999. In 2001, the Massachusetts Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. The ruling stated that while no single piece of evidence was definitive, The combination of physical, testimonial, and digital records was enough for a reasonable jury to convict. It was a blow to Jason's supporters, but it didn't end the fight. DNA technology advances. By the mid-2000s, advances in DNA testing began to change how cold cases and appeals were handled. In 2006, Harrington petitioned for retesting of the fibers and the bedsheet found with Emily's body. The request was granted. The results were mixed. The sheet and Emily's clothing yielded male DNA, but it was too degraded to produce a full profile. What little was present did not match Jason Miller. Harrington seized on that fact, arguing that it pointed to another possible perpetrator. Prosecutors countered that the DNA could have been from secondary transfer, touch DNA from handling before or after Emily's death. The courts sided with the prosecution, noting that the absence of Jason's DNA did not exonerate him, given the weight of other evidence. The Forest Hollow controversy. In 2011, a former Baltimore Ridge police detective, now retired, gave an interview suggesting that Forest Hollow Park had been a known dump site in several unrelated cases. This fueled speculation among Jason's supporters that someone else, possibly connected to those older cases, could have been responsible for Emily's death. Mitchell, still with the department at that time, publicly dismissed the theory. She pointed out that no evidence in Emily's case matched any other open or closed homicide linked to the park. But the seed of doubt had been planted. True crime forums and amateur investigators began dissecting every detail of the case online. Some convinced the wrong man was behind bars. The 20-year mark. In January 2019, exactly 20 years after Emily vanished, a local journalist named Daniel Pratt released a podcast series revisiting the case. It was thorough. Interviews with former classmates, legal experts, and even Harrington, who was still representing Jason in post-conviction proceedings. The podcast reignited public debate. Pratt highlighted inconsistencies in witness statements, particularly around the parking lot sightings, and questioned the reliability of the gas station video. He also noted that the palm print in Jason's truck could not be dated, making it impossible to prove it was placed there on the day of the murder. For Martha Carter, the podcast was an unwelcome reopening of old wounds. She issued a statement saying, "I've lived with this loss for 20 years. The jury heard the evidence. They made their decision. I will not let strangers on the internet rewrite my daughter's story." New testing, old results. In 2021, Jason's legal team secured funding for the most advanced DNA testing available, including touch DNA analysis and mitochondrial sequencing. The focus was on re-examining soil and trace fibers from the truck. The results were the same story told in higher resolution. Soil matched Forest Hollow, consistent with the original findings. Fibers from the sheet still matched those in the truck. No new DNA profile emerged to point to anyone else. For prosecutors, it was confirmation that the right man was in prison. For the defense, it was frustration. Technology had given them sharper images but no exoneration. The legal standstill. By 2023, all direct appeals had been exhausted. Jason's case entered what's called post-conviction relief territory, petitions for review based on new evidence or constitutional claims. None gained traction. Prosecutors remained firm. The case against Jason Miller has withstood multiple reviews over more than 2 decades, ADA Reynolds told the press. "We have never wavered in our position that justice was served." Harrington's response was equally unwavering. Circumstantial evidence can convict an innocent man. Until we have definitive forensic proof, there will always be doubt. Lingering questions. Even with Jason behind bars, parts of the story remain clouded. The biggest unanswered question is the exact sequence of events between Emily leaving school and arriving at Forest Hollow. The 90-minute gap has never been fully accounted for. Another is motive. The prosecution argued it was a meeting that escalated into violence, but no one knows what was said in that truck, or if Emily ever agreed to meet Jason at all. And then there's the matter of the other DNA on the sheet, too incomplete to identify, but present enough to keep skeptics circling back to it. Closing the file, but not the story. By late 2025, the Carter case file was officially marked closed in the Baltimore Ridge Police Archives. For law enforcement, it meant the investigation had reached its legal endpoint. For Martha and Dylan, it meant the legal process had nothing left to offer, only the permanence of loss. On the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, a candlelight vigil was held at Westfield Central High School. Former classmates gathered, now adults with children of their own, holding photos and telling stories about Emily's laugh, her drive, her reliability. Detective Mitchell, retired now, attended quietly at the back. When asked if she ever doubted the verdict, she paused for a long moment before saying, "I know what the evidence told me. I also know no case is ever perfect. But if you wait for perfect, you may never get justice at all." And maybe that's where the story rests, not with total certainty but with the uneasy balance between what we can prove and what we can never truly know.